I will say that Dr. Powers was having some technological difficulty, so she may be joining us a couple minutes late, but Mandy will be starting us off. So please join me in welcoming Mandy and Jane Powers. Thank you.
Hi, Mandy.
Hi.
Oh, great. Jane is back. Excellent.
Perfect timing, Jane.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry about that, and I'm sorry for the delay, but I'm Jane Powers, Director of ACT for Youth, and I'm happy to be here with Mandy. I don't know what the introduction was, but I don't know if did you talk about who we are, the center? Or
Nope.
Okay.
Your
Okay.
timing is perfect.
All right. So by way of background, ACT is an intermediary organization that's been funded since 2000 by the New York State Department of Health, and we support their grantees who are funded that work primarily in the area of adolescent health. We provide them with training, technical assistance, evaluation, and also develop and disseminate resources to help practitioners and educators, people who are basically working on the front line with youth. We build their capacity to do their work more effectively. So much of our work has involved translating research for use by practitioner and policymakers. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, hello, with our website, I encourage you to check us out. We've got a lot of really great resources. But anyhow, we started doing focus groups at the request of the Department of Health, who wanted to learn more about what youth in New York State thought about particular topics. Their interest in hearing from youth really grew out of the positive youth development movement in the late 90s. Positive youth development brought a significant shift in the way policymakers, researchers, and practitioners viewed young people, a shift from a deficit model of viewing young people as problems to a strength-based approach, viewing young people as assets and resources and contributors. So youth engagement is like a fundamental tenet of positive youth development. And focus group methodology really provided a way to obtain youth voice and hear the opinions, ideas, recommendations that young people had about how we could improve their lives and improve programs that serve them and promote their health. So the health department called on us to do a number of focus group projects. We are basically self-taught here. We wish somebody gave us this workshop 12 years ago when we started doing these focus groups. We really learned by doing. We've done lots of them around adolescent sexual health, family planning, binge drinking, dating violence. And what's been especially satisfying about these projects is that the data have been used and incorporated into initiatives and strategies and programs and media campaigns. There's really been a direct application, and that's been very, very satisfying. We have found that young people love doing focus groups with us because we come, we feed them, we pay them, and they talk about sex. And so it's like, when are we coming back? So anyhow, it's been a very good good partnership with the health department on this work. So just to get a sense, if you could just chat in whether or not you've ever participated in a focus group before, so we kind of know who's in the room here. So just give a chat about, have you ever been a participant? Okay. A little bit, a long time ago. All right. What about, have you ever conducted one? Have you ever led a focus group? Ordinarily, we'd be looking at you all in a room and you'd be raising your hands. And okay, so we've got a little bit of mix of experience here. Okay, so as we go along, please share your comments, questions. Don't save them for the end. It will be much more interesting and interactive if you can interrupt us along the way. Is everybody muted, or do we do self-muting here?
It's mostly self-muting,
Okay.
so
right.
people can chime in.
We will not be offended if you interrupt us with a comment or a question. We encourage it. So here's what's going to happen next. This is where we're going. And you really need to make sure that the focus group is the right approach. And we did this, we learned this lesson the hard way. Sometimes we were deep in a focus group project and we said, we probably really should have done a survey here. So it's really knowing that this is the right way to go and save your resources here. We'll talk about how to plan for your focus group, how to conduct it. We'll be talking about virtual focus groups briefly. Most of the work that we've done in this presentation is really based on a pre-pandemic world when we could gather face-to-face. But we'll share some lessons learned in doing virtual focus groups. We'll talk about recording and note-taking, some about data management, and of course data analysis, and we could spend an entire semester talking about that, but we'll touch upon it in our presentation. So, all right, starting out. What is a focus group? Well, focus groups evolved out of industry and were used extensively in market research for developing products. More recently, they've become popular in social science research as a way to generate rich qualitative data. So a focus group involves a small group discussion with a group of people who possess a certain characteristics. They are teenagers living in rural communities. They are parents sending their children to kindergarten for the first time. The discussion is led by a trained leader, and the purpose is really to better understand a topic of interest. What do people think about an issue, a service, a program? And it gives you an opportunity to do a deep dive into like learning about people's understanding of things. Often there is a desire for a concrete application of the findings, that the results will be used to guide future action, such as improving a service or creating a program or developing a media campaign. The focus group really allows you to identify trends and patterns in perception. So in a focus group, what's sort of unique about it is that participants respond to open questions and generate their own questions, but they build on the responses of what other people are saying. Okay, that's very important. Whereas in an interview, you're having a one-on-one conversation, you're gathering really good in-depth information, you're really unpacking people's feelings and ideas. But what you don't get through an interview is the ability for respondents to talk to each other and have their comments build on each other's comments. You don't get the group interaction. Sometimes people really don't know how they feel or have an opinion about something. And sometimes it takes listening to what others are saying and their opinions in a small and safe group setting before they can form their own thoughts and opinions. So focus groups are really well suited for that situation. So you want to use a focus group approach when you want to generate a range of ideas. You want to understand differences in perspectives between groups or categories of people. You want to uncover factors that influence opinions, behavior, and motivation. And ideally, participants' comments will stimulate and influence the thinking and sharing of others. Some people may even change their thoughts and opinions during the focus group. And that's great to be able to capture that. So you use a focus group if you're considering the introduction of a new program or service that could really help formulate that program, or when you want to ask questions that can't easily be answered on a written survey. And this is something that we've done before when you want to supplement knowledge gained from a written survey. So we've done a project in which we did an extensive survey of adolescents across the state. And then we looked at the findings. And in order to better understand the survey findings, we conducted a series of focus groups that really helped us understand sort of differences in groups, rural, urban, males, female, and it was a very useful strategy to use. You don't want to use a focus group if you are trying to achieve consensus, or you have a mission to educate people about a particular topic, or if you're really looking at sensitive information, or you need statistical projections and power, when the potential discussion could be very conflictual, and when you can't ensure confidentiality. As much as we start out and, through a very clear consent process and, everybody is agreeing to confidentiality, you really cannot do that in a focus group like you can with an interview. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Mandy.
Yeah, so yes, thanks for being here. We'll talk a little bit more. So now we've kind of decided that the focus group is the approach that you want. And so again, a lot of these lessons learned along the way in our work, but certainly a good focus group requires planning. There's definitely a lot more to it than just inviting a few key people to casually share opinions about a topic. So these are some kind of like big picture questions to keep in mind as you're planning your focus group study. So first, really important is, what is your purpose? Hopefully you've really kind of grappled with that already in determining that this is the method that you want to use. But what kinds of information are you looking for? What do you want? What's important to know? Who wants this information? How will it be used? Really thinking about ethical, legal, or social considerations. As Jane mentioned, we've done focus groups on a variety of topics. It is possible to do focus groups on relatively sensitive topics, but you need to take that into consideration when you're planning these groups. And then another big consideration is, what kind of resources do you have? And again, this is part of what should be considered when you're planning this method, but focus groups can be pretty resource intensive. Not only is it qualitative data, which can take a bit longer in terms of analysis in general, but it can be really resource intensive to even conduct the focus groups. Getting a group of people in the same space, whether it's physically in person or virtually on Zoom, can be quite a logistical challenge at times. So, what kinds of resources do you have to make that happen? Those are important considerations. So when you've decided what your focus group purpose is, you want to start thinking about your questions. So in this kind of like brainstorming phase, you can really just start putting your ideas together. As you start revising from more of a brainstorming phase to what questions specifically are you going to ask, these are some guidelines that can be helpful here. So you want to make sure that you keep your questions clear and short. You want to make sure that your participants understand what you're asking and can keep the question in mind as they consider their response. So again, in a focus group setting, that's something that's different from, say, a one-to-one interview. Not only do they need to kind of digest your question and come up with their response, they're also paying attention to social dynamics and their level of comfort in contributing at this point in the conversation. So we need to make sure that the questions we offer are easy for them to kind of keep in mind as they're processing all of that and formulating a response. You want to make sure that the words that you're using are familiar to your audience. It's sometimes easy to get into jargon, so this kind of goes with the clear and short. We've done we did one series of focus groups on the topic of preconception health, and we did that with adolescents. And there's a lot of adults who don't know what the term preconception health refers to. So we really had to kind of grapple with, what is the language that we want to use in these focus groups to make it a more familiar concept. And since one of the main benefits of a focus group is generating a host of different ideas, and you really want to promote this conversation, you want to make sure that your questions give participants this opportunity and really keep them open-ended. We definitely don't want a lot of yes/no questions in the focus group. But as you're kind of working on your questions, if you find that you've written a yes/no question, it can often be rephrased to kind of open it up. So for example, changing a question from, does your community have programs for people struggling with food security, which would be a yes or a no response. You could change it to, how does your community support people struggling with food security? So in many cases, you can kind of revise those yes/no questions using why or how to kind of further unpack it. You want to make sure your questions are focused and one-dimensional. You want to make sure that you're really only asking about one dimension of a topic. So for example, if you want to know both where young people get their information about sexual health and whether or not they trust these sources, you have to ask these as separate questions. So first, for example, you could first ask, where do you get information about sexual health, and make note of their responses. And then for each of those categories, ask, how much do you trust this as a source of information about sexual health? So even though, we on the research team might consider these to be kind of two sides of the same coin, very related concepts, it's much easier for your participants to respond if you ask about them separately.
And Mandy,
Mhm.
when I had said that you don't want to do a focus group if you want to talk about sensitive information, sex is pretty sensitive, right? So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, so a strategy that we use for asking about sensitive questions is rephrasing it so that we're not asking for your personal experience or your personal story about this, but we're asking about young people your age. Where do young people your age go for sexual health care? How much do young people your age trust parents as a source of information about sexual health care? So you tend to find that people are probably responding based on their own personal experience, but we all get to deny that that's happening. They have the ability to speak in more general terms, and it's a way to help promote some of that confidentiality because they're not necessarily speaking from their own experience. And that's really key to this, right? Is making sure that you're framing these questions in a non-threatening or embarrassing way. And that has been a strategy that has really, really worked for us on a variety of our focus group projects. So it's good to keep in mind that even if you talk about sexual health all day, every day, which we sometimes do on Act for Youth, not everyone does. So it can be a little bit more sensitive for some people. So, just kind of keeping that in mind in these group settings is really important. So once you have a draft of your questions and you've kind of really thought about how they're structured to promote conversation, now it's time to start developing the overall structure of your questions. So you want to make sure the order of the questions will make sense to your participants, that they flow from one to the other, and that the transitions between one subtopic and the next make sense. You might want to add a few lines of script introducing a new section or topic, which is something that we have often done. So for example, we were doing focus groups asking about challenges and facilitators for youth programming in rural settings. And so, we kind of started off talking more broadly about youth programming in general, but we really wanted to know about one particular program. And so we were able to make that transition by just, keeping it conversational, but actually in our script of questions, adding a sentence that the facilitator could use to make that bridge. Again, for us, we've thought about this quite a bit. We know that that's where the focus group is going, but you have to be sure to bring your participants along with you. It's also really important to identify your key questions and think about their placement in the overall focus group protocol. It might take participants a few questions to get warmed up, so you definitely don't want your key questions to be the very first ones you ask. But you probably don't want to save them for the end either, because sometimes you end up having a very chatty group and it might take a little while to get where you want to be for those later questions. You might also be following up with questions on the spot for your key questions especially. So you want to make sure that you have time to address any additional questions that come up based on the conversation that's happening. A really common question is, how many questions should there be? And there's no one right answer to this. It depends somewhat on your focus, on how many prompts you might include under the specific questions you're asking, follow-up questions you already know you want to ask. But really, it's most important to keep in mind that your goal is to get a discussion going amongst the group. So it's not so much that you want to have a battery of questions prepared. It's so much that you want to have enough questions that you can really spark a conversation. And again, you have to be prepared for the fact that some groups might be really talkative and some might not. So I think it's better to have kind of more questions in your back pocket that you can be prepared with in case the group needs a little bit more of a frame to get the conversation going. But again, just really know what your key questions are so that if you do have a talkative group, you know which ones you can kind of jump over to move through. How many questions? So our kind of rule of thumb that we follow is 12 as a maximum, 10 is better, 8 is ideal. Again, it kind of depends on the number of prompts that you might have. So do kind of think about that. Sequencing of your questions, we kind of have talked about this in terms of thinking about the placement of your key questions. But within questions even, we recommend asking the general questions before the more specific. So for example, I talked about asking about youth programming in general before we got to the specific youth program that we wanted to ask about. You also want to ask about positive aspects of something before you go negative. I don't know if you've noticed this in conversation with people, but once they get going on negative things, it's easy for them to keep going on negative things. And if you want to touch on both, it's better to start with the positive. Also going into a question with no prompt before you ask the prompt. So again, kind of going back to our, where do young people your age get information about sexual health? We ask that question broadly and, listen to the ideas that they generate. And then we might follow up with specific prompts. What about school or teachers or your parents or your friends? So we're prepared with some additional prompts that we want to know if they would consider that a source or not. But we'll wait to see kind of what comes up out of their responses to the more general questions first. This is a page from a really great resource. We do have the full citation at the end of the presentation, but this is from FocusGroups, a practical guide for applied research, which I highly recommend. And this is just an example questioning route. So this has 10 questions. You can see they start with just kind of an opening question. This is a great way to kind of get people warmed up a little bit, something that everyone can answer. It doesn't really put them on the spot in too much of a way. So here, this example was, tell us your name and tell us how long you've been working with the program. So just a real easy one for people to have that experience of saying something in this group setting. They have an introductory question and a couple transition questions before they really get to their key questions, which are 5, 6, 7, and 8. The other thing that I really like that this example highlights here are these ending questions. I really recommend including something along these lines. So question 9 here, if you had the chance to give advice to the director of this program, what advice would you give? In many of our focus groups, as Jane mentioned, we are really gathering this information for a specific purpose. So if you wanted to let the Department of Health know what young people think about XYZ, what would you say? So that's kind of a nice way to wrap up. The latter part of question 10 is also a great way to really end things. So is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that you came wanting to say that you didn't get a chance to say? So just opening it up really wide, but it's also clear that the conversation is coming to an end. So once you have your questions developed, next up is piloting. Super, super important. So you want to try to estimate the time that you want to give to each question or segment of this conversation. Get feedback from folks. Share the questions with your peers, with your colleagues, with your friends. Try asking a group of people these questions. I have had a lot of fun realizing I can't say these 4 words together out loud because you've accidentally made like a tongue twister, so just getting the practice of going through the questions, revising the questions. Sometimes we find that we've accidentally really introduced redundancy, to us when we were generating these questions. It seemed like we were asking really distinct questions, different concepts, but they're just in conversation way too close, or we're really getting too much of the same kind of answers. The participants can't distinguish between what it is that's just too nuanced. So sometimes you rethink and restructure those questions, or maybe you cut one of those questions because they're just really not that different. So the piloting process is really, really important, especially given how resource intensive focus groups are. You want to make sure that you're not, going through a process that isn't going to really yield the information or results you want. And then I think I'm handing it back over to Jane for recruitment.
Okay, thanks, Mandy. So as Mandy kept alluding to, you really need to keep your purpose in mind here and not lose track of that. It's really easy to want to ask more and more and more questions, but just as with that, in terms of recruitment, you have to be really aware of what your purpose is. We've learned this the hard way. A perfect example of what not to do is once we were asked to help an organization who were developing a youth employment program. And we relied on them to recruit. And they wanted to hear from youth about what are the barriers that you faced in getting jobs, and so that they could develop their program based on some of these strategies. And no one in the focus group had ever applied for a job or wanted a job. So that was like a super fast focus group and a real waste of time. So making sure you have the right people at the table is very, very important. So who do you want to hear from? Do you want to hear from youth in a particular community, elders in an assisted living facility, Cornell students who are in fraternities? And you want to bring people together who share a common characteristic. And the similarity is the basis for the recruitment, and everybody knows this. For example, if you wanted to develop an adult community education program, and you want to know how to reach people who are not participating, who haven't reached out for this service. In this case, homogeneity, or the common characteristic, is defined as adults who live in the community and have yet to attend community education. So the group could vary by age, gender, occupation, and interest, but all the adults are there who are residents and non-users. So be clear. Do you want different groups for different age participants, all male, all female? Now, according to the literature, the ideal is to have a homogeneous group of strangers. So familiarity often inhibits disclosure based on that kind of notion. We break this all the time. I think I've rarely been in a focus group where people didn't know each other, okay? And because we rely on others to recruit for us. And, but so it's very difficult to have complete anonymity unless you're doing it remotely. So we'll get to that. That's one of the advantages potentially of online focus groups, is that ability to have anonymity much easier. Anyhow, we often get asked the question, what's the best size of a focus group? And the rule of thumb is about 6 to 10 people is probably best. You really don't want any more than 12. You want enough so that there's a conversation that can happen, but not large enough so that some participants get left out. And so we found that 6 to 10 is really ideal. That's different in the virtual focus group. You want it smaller, but we'll talk about that momentarily. So how many groups do you need to have? Next slide. The rule of thumb here is 4 groups who are very in similar composition. And you would do this until you get little new information, until you achieve saturation. So you need to be analyzing the data as you go along when you're trying to figure out how many groups that you're going to need. What kind of representation do you want? I mean, do you want different views from, regional or urban, rural, or male, female? So this is going to all determine the number of groups that you're going to have. When we did a major project for the health department, our very first focus group project about adolescent sexual health, we wanted to hear from youth all over the state, from all different sectors of the youth population. So we did lots, 30 of these focus groups with just different sectors: HIV positive youth, new immigrant youth, upstate, urban, rural. At any rate, that was a major recruitment effort. So when it comes to recruitment strategies, you want to be very thoughtful and deliberate. Different ways to do this. I mean, you can contact people and get nominations. You could sort of say, we're looking for people, go to champions in the community. We're looking for people who know about this or who have had this kind of experience. And you could develop a pool of eligible participants and then randomly select them. We have frequently piggybacked on other events and have found this to be very successful. Like there's already a group of homeless youth that are meeting once a month because they're part of a housing scholarship program. So we were able to do a focus group with homeless youth at one of their monthly meetings, or a PTA meeting if you're trying to reach parents is a very good strategy of building on something that's happening. We have often used the resources of the sponsoring organization. So we work with, programs across New York State, 100 of them. And so we work through those programs we need a focus group of adolescent boys who live in Oswego County, and so we go to our programs like that. That's really been a major way that we have really recruited for our health department focus groups. It's good to, if you're doing it yourselves and not relying on other organizations, to personalize invitation, and incentives are very important. So the kind of incentives that we have used, money, that's the most popular one, but food, gift certificates, or a big ticket item like a raffle, an iPod or something, often providing childcare. And Mandy mentioned this, how important it is to be very upbeat and positive in why participation matters, that your opinions are really going to be incorporated and used by the health department and really make a difference for youth in New York State, So these are things that we have used. And all of this we're talking about the pre-pandemic world of how we would do these focus groups. And so in the next slide, we talk about making it easy to attend, right? Oh, wait, which one is it? Is this the one? Setup procedures? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I accidentally hit the advance twice.
Okay, all right. So it's good to let people know how long this is going to be. This was the in-person focus group, would be about 1.5 to 2 hours. And that includes, setting things up, and different, having food there. And that's why the actual focus group discussion itself should be about an hour. But contacting people, making sure that they remember, you can't hit them over the head enough about this when you are wanting to make sure that they're going to attend the focus group. The personalized invitations, contacting people is really, really important. And that's what we found in the virtual focus groups as well, how important that is, just to remind people. And next slide. Making it easy to attend, scheduling it over the weekend or in the evenings, if you're able to give cab fare or Metro cards, offering childcare, sometimes if you need interpreter services, doing this in a familiar public setting, make it easy for them to get there. Next slide. And where could that be? In a convenient place, a school cafeteria. Those chairs are way too close. I mean, again, it's just really funny to look at these slides that were created in the world when we just did these in schools and everybody was packed together around a table, and the closer the better, because you want to hear people. Do them in schools. Make sure that you have a setup that people can see each other and talk to each other and hear each other. Doing it in the public library is that has been a successful venue. Schools, after school, that's where many, many times we've been doing these with young people after school. And you don't want to do it in the cafeteria where kids are running around. You need a quiet space where there can be a safe, confidential, kind of quiet conversation. So doing virtual focus groups um, is something that people actually were doing prior to the pandemic, and but since the pandemic, I think there's been much more of use of, that's the only way you could do focus groups basically. And I actually did one last week virtually. So I feel like I'm kind of hot off the press with some recommendations around this. Um, so what are some of the benefits of doing them virtually? First of all, you can really reach people from all over the place. And get people at different time zones, and really obtain geographic diversity if you've got some topics that you want to really explore in that way. Also getting hard to reach populations, it's much more efficient, and you don't have to, you can just show up. There's no transportation costs, and it's easier for people to attend. They don't, they can just take out a little bit of time of their lives. Very, very convenient, and you're more likely to have anonymity with virtual focus groups potentially. It depends on how you recruit, but it's easier to obtain a group who don't know each other potentially. Very easy to record and transcribe, especially if you're using Zoom. And it's more youth friendly. Youth are much more comfortable in the virtual world. And so those are all advantages of using of doing a virtual focus group, but there are disadvantages. I mean, you're limiting your participants to those who can handle the technology. So if you're interested in the elderly, you better think twice about doing a virtual focus group. It's also hard to observe body language. I mean, when you're there in person, you're watching people, you have more sense of if they don't understand you or if they're uncomfortable with something that you can kind of handle. Managing group dynamics is harder. Like I had somebody who just did not stop talking. And it was really, really hard to wrangle him in. And that was just so challenging. And so that's definitely a disadvantage of being in the virtual world doing a focus group. It's also, I think, a little more challenging to establish rapport, and you're more likely to get attrition and no shows. Would anybody add anything thinking about what might be advantages or disadvantages? All right, next slide. So here are a couple of tips. An interesting, so I definitely think I had 4 people in this focus group, and that was just right. Okay. It's much harder to manage all these people, and just seeing little pictures of them on your screen. Um, Many of the articles, there's been a lot that's been written about virtual focus groups actually, and it's so interesting because they spend a lot of time talking about make sure your software features and you have video chat and anticipate technology needs, and do you have a webcam. And that was really prior to the pandemic, because most people can just get onto Zoom very easily now, except of course I had a problem getting onto this. But there was, I think, in the one that I did last week, that was absolutely, not an issue, except somebody had connectivity problem and had to just be audio. And that was challenging because you didn't have her picture on the screen. And so one of the things that I found myself doing in this focus group was just going around asking people. So Liz, do you have anything to add here? Bill, what do you think about this? And, in a normal focus group, sometimes you have to do that to get everybody talking, but I did that throughout this one because of this person wasn't on the screen. Anyhow, making sure that you have access to a quiet space is important, and having a plan for how you're going to deal with latecomers. I had a latecomer, and that was a little tricky. Actually, she came at the point where the person who wouldn't stop talking And so that was actually my way to get that person to stop talking. So it was a really nice strategy. So that's virtual focus groups.
Which is a good segue to the facilitator and the role of the facilitator. So here are just some kind of characteristics to keep in mind. So as the facilitator for the focus group, you really want to have someone who can listen very attentively, with sensitivity and with empathy, but still remain relatively neutral. One of the things that you're trying to do is encourage lots of different opinions and thoughts and ideas on things. So you don't want one participant to hear how you have been so excited about this other participant's response and cause them to kind of maybe not contribute their idea because it's counter to it. So it's, you have to kind of really, be right in the middle in some ways. So acknowledging what's being said and being engaged without really seeming to endorse one thought or opinion over another. And part of that is this respect, right? And demonstrating and encouraging that everyone's voice in this focus group is valid and important to be heard. It's also important to have adequate knowledge of the topic. So for example, we have lots of sexual health focus group examples, but we're asking about a whole host of birth control options, but many of them have different nicknames or slang terms connected with them that aren't the medical terms. So it's really good to kind of like know and be aware of those kinds of things so that you're both understanding what your participants are talking about, or you could ask for more clarification. And that's, that's an important thing to be able to do. If there's something being said that you don't know what that is or don't understand, feel free to ask that question. Again, definitely wanting to kind of keep your personal views and your ego out of that facilitation. You're just there to kind of guide this conversation. It's really good to have the facilitator be someone the group can relate to. Jane, can I give your example here? Or I'll let you give your example of how to not do this. Oh, we can't hear you.
Wait, what was it? I was reading the chat just now.
Oh,
what was your question?
Sorry, I was going to say for point 5 that it's important to have the facilitator be someone that the group can relate to.
Oh, do you mean when I gave the focus group to 12-year-old boys in what was it, Buffalo? There were like 15 boys and me. Yes, I wasn't appropriate to be leading that.
That's
Thank
one
you.
of my favorite
Thanks
examples.
for reminding me of that one.
You learn from our mistakes is all I can say. Right. And having someone who can manage these challenging group dynamics, you're going to have, especially if you do several of them, you're going to have a bunch of different ones kind of thrown out at you. So conducting the focus group, this section I think will actually answer some of the questions that have popped up in the chat. So when we are finally together and ready to launch our focus group session, we really kind of start off with introductions. So we usually go into a focus group with a team. We usually have one facilitator and 2 note takers, and the note takers stay pretty quiet. So they actually, we spread ourselves out in the group. We're often kind of sitting in a circle or around a table. Again, this is all the like physical in-person focus groups, but we spread ourselves out. So we're not all like clumped up together. And honestly, the note takers end up kind of just disappearing into the background for the participants. I think it's a very difficult task to both facilitate and note take. I would really recommend against that if at all possible. If you have other people who can help you with this project, that would be great. So we start off with like introducing ourselves and then introducing the focus group itself. So not a lot of people have participated in focus groups. So they want to know, it's good to let them know why you're asking these questions, but also what a focus group is, why they were invited, why we're doing this. It's also really good to set some expectations, and some of this can help with facilitation challenges. So it's good to talk about, how long we're expecting the focus group to last, the fact that it's a discussion with no right or wrong answers, that we really want to display respect for everyone and everyone's contributions. And there's a couple of ground rules that I often use at the beginning of a focus group. So one is this step up, step back. And so the idea here is that if you've really been contributing quite a bit recently, I might ask you to step back a little bit and let others have kind of the first opportunity to speak with the next question. And the step up piece, if you've been really quiet lately, I might ask you to step up at the next question and see if you can contribute to that one a little bit. And setting that up as a ground rule expectation means that when it actually happens in the focus group, the person is less likely to feel called out, right? So it was like, we talked about it at the beginning that might happen, and now it's happening. So we had that expectation. The other one that I like to throw out there in terms of confidentiality is the Vegas rule. So, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That's how this focus group is going to work. Whatever is said in this room stays in this room. It's my job.
Yeah. We have a question here about confidentiality and whether or not we get participants to sign releases, and how can we guarantee anonymity?
Oh, those are good questions. So this is a real kind of mutual agreement to protect confidentiality. So one thing I was going to say is, as you're going through what I have kind of bulleted here, basically we are walking them through the main points of consent form, right? So our purpose or our process always starts with the process of informed consent. And so part of that is really emphasizing this piece around confidentiality, and it's my job to protect your confidentiality, but it's the job of everyone else in this group to protect confidentiality as well. So you really cannot guarantee anonymity, right? So there's, we have these ethical and moral obligations to protect what was said in this group, but I cannot guarantee that Jane won't go tell somebody what I said. So that is part of the reason that you really want to be thoughtful about what your questions are and how you frame your questions as well. So related to confidentiality, I always talk about recording, and this also gets to one of the earlier comments around the note taking. So we let them know that the note takers are here to do just that, but they're capturing what it is that you're saying so that we're sure to not miss anything. They're not looking to write down, you know, Jane said this and this, and I'm gonna, you know, make sure to call her out on that. It's not like that. We're just looking to make sure that we don't miss any of the details that are being said. We always also bring along an audio recorder for these in-person groups, and it depends on, again, your purpose and your resources, what kind of data you're going to end up working with. If you go from transcription to analysis, that's, you know, a certain level of resources that are required for that. A lot of times we have a pretty quick turnaround. What we do is we have our 2 note takers who then get together and develop one set of notes, and they debrief with the facilitator. So we kind of like immediately have 3 eyes reviewing this set of notes for robustness. And then we have our audio recording. So if there's anything that we need to kind of fill in or listen to again to get clarification on, we will do that. And it's also the audio file is a great way to pull out quotes if you want to use those later. We also always ask if folks have any questions before we get started and let them know that they can ask us questions along the way. This says see background handout. So we do have an example one of these forms for you to take a look at.
Mandy, we have a ton of questions.
Great.
So I'm just as a heads up about where we are.
Okay, so let's see.
Yeah. I didn't mean to completely throw you off.
Sorry. No, I'm just trying to look at. So anytime we use quotes, we would not connect a person's name with that quote. We do include that information in the consent form, that we might pull out quotes, but that they would not be connected to a person. I do have a comment on getting everyone to provide a response without putting anyone on the spot. Having done audio and video, so you could attribute statements. Yep. So it's, not so much that they're signing a release as it is that they're signing a consent form. And then, questions about qualitative data analysis. Do you anonymize your data before starting your analysis? So we can talk about that in a minute.
Okay,
Oh.
we have like 5 minutes left.
Okay, we'll keep going here. So thank you for all of your questions.
Maybe we should respond in a written way to questions after.
Yeah, we can do that too. Yes. Yeah, take space, make space. That's a good idea. So again, facilitation, just in terms of staying on top of the question structure, thinking about where you want to get additional information or probes. Oops. These are some strategies for dealing with difficult participants. So ways to kind of acknowledge their contribution, but ask for others to contribute. In-person ways, there are some in-person strategies here, like making eye contact or jumping in when someone takes a breath to kind of say, oh, thank you for that. Let's see what others over here maybe have to say, to kind of prevent a dominator from truly just taking hold of the conversation. We do have a facilitation tips handout that you can take a look at for more information here. We talked a bit about note-taking already. So the note-taking tips handout has some more specific guidance in terms of kind of, again, thinking about your purpose and the kinds of analysis that you want to do, the level of detail that you want either in your notes or if you want to go with transcription. So those are important considerations when you think about your timeline and your resources and the number of groups that you have. And again, coming back to the purpose. In terms of data management, so this touches on some of the earlier questions. So you certainly want to be thinking about how you're going to have secure storage. If you have audio recordings, if you have notes, if you have hard copy, consent, assent, permission forms, where are those going? And you should have hopefully already thought about this a bit in preparing your IRB submission, right? So where are these things going? But you really want to consider your analysis plan when you think about that kind of storage. So who needs to have access to this information? Is it a team? Is it individuals? There was a question about anonymity, like kind of modifying participant names. So a lot of times we don't actually record participant names in our notes. We will often, or even in the audio recording, because they're not really often speaking each other's names. So even if we go the transcription route, it's really not necessarily names that would be an issue. For us, it tends to be more places. So they'll mention a specific place or community or program or something like that that we'll need to remove. Often our team who is conducting the analysis is part of the team who conducted the focus groups. So we definitely, if we're creating transcripts, once those are created, we are sure to review them to make sure we take out anything that could potentially be identifying. But it really is kind of the same team. We don't have a separate group doing that piece. Data analysis, as Jane mentioned, we could spend tons and tons of time on this. As I'm sure you are all well aware, qualitative data analysis is, there's a lot to it for sure. We could talk a lot about it, but I would say it's really important, again, keep that purpose in mind, that you're systematic, that you keep in mind that this is a continuous process. So you should be documenting your process throughout. Even our initial debrief following a focus group where we have our note takers and facilitator get together and talk, that's essentially the first round of data analysis. And it's important to document what's happening there. that helps us determine if we've reached saturation or if we need to keep going. There's lots of different frameworks that you could use. Essentially, you're looking for themes and identifying patterns. One of the things that I think is unique for focus group data analysis is that you are looking both across and within groups. So sometimes you are looking to see how are these groups saying the same things, or when are they saying the same things, or when are they not? But also within a group, you know, how many people agreed with this statement? Is it someone said this and the whole room went, yeah? Or was it one person said this thing and everyone else just kind of quietly acknowledged that they said it, you know? So the degree to which all members of a group kind of stood behind that idea or statement, or where there was discussion or disagreement. Those are some of the really interesting things to pull out when you're doing focus group data analysis. So I just have a couple of screenshots of different approaches we've used. We've gone like real old school with pulling out statements in Excel and grouping things categorically there. We use Deduce, which is actually a mixed methods data analysis program. I have done workshops just on Deduce before. There's a lot there. This is just another screenshot of a project in there. But I know there was some question and comment about other data analysis tools. There certainly are a number of different qualitative data analysis programs available. But again, I think it comes back to kind of your purpose and who will be doing the analysis and the kinds of resources that you have.
We have a lot of questions, but I just want to go just share all the different resources that we have in the slides. There are these books. Dick Kruger is like the guru on focus groups. So I really encourage you to check out his stuff. And this book at the very top, Dominators, Cynics, and Wallflowers, Practical Strategies for Moderating Meaningful Focus Groups. Lots of strategies on how to deal with different types of people in the focus group. And then the next couple of slides show online resources. It's very excellent sources of guidance. And finally, something on doing online. Oh, that was the online resources, as well as these other resources that are out there for resources on doing focus groups. So, I mean, we are past 2 o'clock, but I think, you know, we're willing to stay on for a couple of minutes if people want to ask questions that we weren't able to get to. Lots of questions here. And sorry if we weren't able to keep on top of them through the presentation, but as I said, we're happy to stay on for a few minutes if people want to unmute and ask us their questions.
I see it.
Go ahead. Mandy, were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I saw there's a question. If you don't connect the quote to a person, how do you stop another participant from outing the anonymous person quoted later? So that's a great question. I think if that's something that you are concerned about, I think paraphrasing would probably be the best way to go. And just indicate in whatever documentation this is, if it's a report or a paper, indicate that you have paraphrased quotes to some extent to protect anonymity. Okay, yeah, and so Florio has the question about data security. We save most of our materials on Box. So no one keeps materials on their personal computers, whether it be home computer, Cornell computer. We really save everything on Box. If we use Deduce for our data analysis, that has a lot of security protections in place already. It was developed by mixed methods researchers, so they definitely understand the necessary security protocols. We do anonymize data before we put it into Deduce.
Well, I think our time has unfortunately come to an end. First of all, I want to thank you for doing an expedited version of this for us. I realize that you typically do it in 90 minutes. So I really appreciate you guys really sharing with us today. I think, you know, the level of questions and engagement is really a sign of how helpful this was. So thank you both so much for sharing with us today. I know I learned a lot and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And
You're
we're
welcome.
happy to follow up. You know, we'll send our slides and people should contact us. And so you know, it was just, there were so many questions. I couldn't keep up with it. So that's, oh my gosh, it felt like a speed dating version of this workshop. All
No, the
right.
questions are great though. I absolutely.
They were. We've never gotten questions like this.
Yeah.
This level, this interest, the complexity of the questions. So can we save the chat?
Yes, so the chat will be saved along with the recording of the presentation.
Okay.
And we'll make your slides available through the QuIRI website as well. I think, again, the community that the Qualitative and Interpretive Research Institute brings together is an engaged group of researchers. And so it's fantastic. Yeah.
It shows, it really shows. I mean, you know, that was just great, really great. So
excellent. Thank you again, Jane. Thanks, Mandy.
Take care, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.